A video version of this podcast is available to watch for free at patreon.com/The Bill Podcast. Hello and welcome to The Bill Podcast, brought to you in association with GeorgeFairbrother.com, shop.saturdaymorningpress.co.uk, vanguardcomics.co.uk and gibconsultancy.co.uk. My name's Oliver Crocker and I hope you are all well. This is the 129th edition of The Bill Podcast to be released publicly. Our Patreon channel has also now been running for 5 years, where at least 14 pieces of original content is released every single month, continuously, without a break. There have been over 110 cast and crew commentaries on Patreon, plus dozens of exclusive podcasts, including the new weekly series, The Evidence Room. There are pilgrimage location videos, reunion highlights from lockdown, and over 400 reaction videos of me either guffawing or wincing or occasionally being moved by episodes of The Bill across its wonderful 26-year reign. It wouldn't have been possible to make that amount of Patreon content, over 175 hours of it to date, without the support of our patrons, including our 4 sponsors who I read out at the beginning, Mr. George Fairbrother, Michael Seeley, Mark Bennett and Stuart Gibbon. Thank you all. And also thank you to the subscribers of all the ranks. Now, 3 of our producer patrons are going to be my guests on this podcast. There's a very special reason why they are all here, because the Bill Podcast presenting family is growing. And there's a simple reason for that. As many of you know, I have written 2 witness statements books covering the early days of the Bill. Last year, I was honoured to be asked and to help the mighty Larry Dan write his autobiography, Oh, What a Lovely Memoir. And that led to an opportunity for me at the start of this year to work on another autobiography as a ghostwriter. And as we record this podcast, today I finished the first draft of that book. It was whilst I was working on that I realised I needed some help to keep the Bill Podcast alive and kicking. And that's where my special guests come in. These talented gentlemen are not only 3 of the longest serving supporters and patrons of the Bill Podcast, but they are each TV historians in their own right. And I'm also grateful to say that through the podcast and our mutual love of the Bill and other classic telly, they've also become my friends. And between them, they have already recorded some fantastic interviews that we will be announcing in this podcast. So, without further ado, I shall reveal our mystery guests. And first up is a TV historian and author who legendary Bill scribe Barry Appleton described as a master storyteller, the author of these 2 beauties, 2 reaching a verdict books with a 3rd on the way. It's Mr. Edward Kellett. Hello, Edward.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the big intro. It's quite an honour.
It's well deserved, mate. Next up, we've got a TV historian who has been working very hard on a book celebrating another iconic television series that we will be announcing in this podcast. So please welcome my friend and a Bill fan of serious calibre, Mr. Patrick Stratford. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Oliver. Absolute pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here, mate. And last but by no means least, we've got another TV historian and the man behind the Off the Bill social channels, which celebrate our favourite Sun Hill stars in some of their other television roles. He has been working very hard behind the scenes on his first book about another classic TV series that we'll be giving you an update about on this podcast. It's the one and only Mr. Rob Cook. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited that you're all here, and I can't wait to talk about the work you've each been doing, which has genuinely given me a new lease of life in the Bill Podcast. I've been loving working with you all and seeing the gold you've been coming up with, so I can't wait to talk about that. But before we get there, this podcast is being recorded just a few days after the sad passing of Roberta Taylor that was announced just 3 days before we're recording, which obviously came as a great shock to all Bill fans who greatly admired Roberta. In a moment, we'll be paying our respects to Roberta and talking about some of our favourite Inspector Gina Gold moments. But before then, I've also got some other sad news to share with everyone on this podcast. A name we all know and someone who's had an awful lot of input and given an awful lot of support to the Bill podcast over the last 5 years is Mr. Tom Sherrington, who a lovely man, and sadly, as I record this, Tom passed away yesterday morning after a lengthy and very brave battle with cancer. Tom's family were with him yesterday when he passed away, and his sister Becky was kind enough to actually drop me a line the same day and let me know, which Tom had requested she do, which, as you can imagine, moved me enormously. Tom, through his cancer, had actually lost his eyesight over 3 years ago, yet still somehow managed to enjoy listening to the Bill and tune into the podcast and write, I'm sure we'll all agree, the most incredibly detailed and insightful messages. Yeah. I mean, his knowledge of the Bill was phenomenal. And I know we've all not met Tom in person, but we've all interacted and engaged with his comments over the last year. So I wanted to announce the sad news, but also just to say that tonight's podcast is dedicated to Tom Sherrington, and I'm sending we all are sending our love and best wishes, Becky, his sister, and the whole Sherrington family. We're really sorry for your loss, and I cannot tell you the number of messages I have enjoyed exchanging with Tom over the last 5 years.
It's so strange because every time you'd see a video up, you'd always inevitably see a very long and detailed and very clever analysis of what you had just been talking about. And he was kind of in a league of his own in that. I think it was remarkable.
Yeah, it was a sad loss to the podcast family, certainly.
Absolutely.
His knowledge, the amount of times I throw out there, what was the episode where Inspector Conway did this? And inevitably, it would be one of you three or Tom who were first in there, or Sarah Went, or Ben Ashby. We've got a wonderful community on Patreon. It's a real family of like seriously impressive knowledge of the Bill. And Tom was a huge part of that.
If I'd known that he had that as well, that he had that disability, but he was able to sort of come up with that, I'd be even more amazed,
Not once did he ever bemoan his lot. He was a beacon of positivity, which is what I admire about him. So really, really sad. And it was obviously also really sad about Roberta Taylor this week. It's been a hard week for Bill fans. I've already spoken enough. I think it's time that we started to hear some of the new voices we're going to be getting used to on this show. But between you all, what do you think of when I say the name Roberta Taylor and indeed the character of Inspector Gina Gold? What thoughts come to your minds?
In a sense, she always stood out from, certainly in the Bill in that period, because she was like the deadpan voice in the middle of it, kind of commenting on an awful lot of sometimes daft stuff going on around her. I think she was that kind of voice in the middle, kind of voice of sense, which I think makes her really stand out. I mean, like that bit where Luke is about to get married and he has slept with Sergeant Gilmore, and she comes in and finds this, and it's like, oh, that was great. She was the first to come around. That would have been good, wouldn't it? And she was always so good at that kind of wry humour.
I think for me, the character, you've had Munro there for so long and it left such a mark that, Gina Gold's come in and immediately made her mark straight away. And she's one of those characters that I found in that era, the soapy era, a number of those characters would not have fitted in any way, shape or form in the 90s or even the 80s. And she would have done. You can imagine her walking the corridors of Sun Hill at Balby Road, for example, as a lowly PC or a sergeant. And even after she left, I think she would have fitted in really, really well with the rebrand of the last sort of year or so. And yeah, Roberta Taylor, just a great actress. And when I saw I think it was your post on Twitter, actually, Ollie. I think, or someone to retweet. Yeah, I think it was you when you retweeted the Guardian obituary. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh no, I hadn't. If I'm honest, I'd watched her obviously in The Bill and EastEnders prior to that, which again, she was Irene Raymond when she came into The Bill for me, and then she very quickly gone. She's Gina Gold, and that's how good she was, that she could get, for me, that other character gone. And I've watched other stuff and on Off the Bill. I recently retweeted a couple from last year. She did a Dangerfield and In Suspicious Circumstances. And I've not had the pleasure of meeting her at an event, but to see her passing, yeah, it was. I think I said to my wife, "Oh my God!" And she's like, "What?" And that's the response that I had when I saw that sad news.
In the hands of another actor, the character could have gone in a direction that maybe might not have worked. But I think what Roberta brought to the part, as you mentioned there, was that wryness and that sense of, particularly with that sort of rivalry with June Ackland as well, and that sense that she was kind of winding her up, as it were. Recently, I rewatched her final episode and her final scene with Alex Walkinshaw. I mean, those are two characters that are almost like a double act to many people, one of the great Bill double acts. Watching it again, it was very moving for those two characters to say goodbye, and a phenomenal actress and one who will definitely be sadly missed.
Yeah, to me, someone summed it up online, but she was such a truthful actor that they just believed every single word she said in any scene. And let's face it, in The Bill and EastEnders, in a lot of her work, she's had to do some drama in quite preposterous circumstances occasionally, but the believability, the credibility that she brought with every line, and my heart breaks for Peter Guinness, who obviously worked alongside her in The Bill, and their chemistry understandably was electric. My heart breaks for him and their whole family. On to happier notes. We're here to celebrate the three of you joining the podcast ranks, and I also want everyone to get to know you all a bit here, and your association with The Bill and love of telly in general. So I'd love to start with you, Edward, because yours is the name of the three of you here that people will most be familiar with, thanks to your brilliant Reaching a Verdict books. So what was your introduction to The Bill and your journey into being sat here today?
Well, I mean, it was a sort of childhood thing in the mid-90s, I think, like a lot of people. And it was a kind of on-off thing. I think it was about 94. That's the year we got a TV. So that's the first time I saw a few episodes. It was when Jay Griffiths was in The Bill. And there were a few vague memories. I have a definite memory of her leaving that last episode where she's kind of in tears at the end. I definitely remember seeing that. But it was always kind of on-off. And it was never something that really struck me. It was only about a decade, about 2008, I remember. That's when I suddenly got the DVDs of the early series and watched them all. And that's when it kind of, something clicked. I don't know why. It's one of those things where you just think, I want to see more of this. And you just want to keep on acquiring stuff. And of course, back then, like 15 years ago, trying to watch the series was challenging. Yeah, I mean, I think the DVDs hadn't quite started coming out yet in Australia. And so you just have bits and pieces on YouTube, and that kind of makes it more interesting because you think, well, how does this link to that? And it was a slow process and I mean, I never would have imagined I would get to this point. Because I mean, when I was watching the show back about 10 years ago, there wasn't your podcast, there wasn't anything on it. It was an X series, effectively. And you never thought that there'd be something coming along celebrating it and giving it its due. That's the most surprising and refreshing thing about it, because the show deserved it, but you never thought it would come along. So,
like I discovered with All Creatures Great and Small, you assume that someone will be doing this, and I'm sure that if I hadn't done it when I did, that one of you would have started it or any of the other fans we all know. Someone would have done it. But it's just great how we've all come together.
I remember the first few you did. I remember realizing one of the first ones you did was an interview with Andrew McIntosh. And I can remember thinking when I saw that, well, this is a fan list, because it should be celebrated as one of the most recognisable people of the show, but he's not in a way. And I thought when I saw that, okay, this is definitely somebody who knows their stuff, not just the usual people who appear on shows talking about it. So
yeah, I remember I tweeted that I'd interviewed Andrew McIntosh and Larry Dan. I tweeted about them both on the same day, and someone wrote "game changer" on Twitter. I thought, oh, good, I got something going now. And then when I interviewed Suzanne Maddock, and that's still the most listened to podcast, and then Trudy, and it was whilst the Trudy one was airing that the Drama Channel announced that they'd be starting them all from the beginning, and that the hits on the podcast went. So it was all just kind of timing, and the fact that it was Trudy's podcast that had just come out at that moment, you couldn't make it up. Yeah, I feel a bit of fate coming in there, and the universe saying, all right, and here we go.
How long did they last in total? I know they finished at the end of like 88 or something, didn't they? Those repeats. I still remember. I still remember the announcement with poor Michael Higgs and Caroline Katz getting the brunt of people going, well, we've seen all their stuff loads and loads of times. And I feel like that's had a sort of unfortunate impact on those episodes, because they're brilliant episodes, but people were like, I don't want to see them again. I want to, I couldn't resist. I've been pretty respectful with things as I've got further into this. You learn when to have an opinion or not. But I remember going, You've skipped all of Andrew McIntosh's episodes, and that's probably why the Drama Channel have never answered my calls. How did you get into writing, Edward? And first of all, we should explain that you are an award-winning writer, but we've never talked about why you're an award-winning writer. So I'd love to hear this. Well, I mean, the award was won just over 25 years ago in year 9 for a ghost story competition at school. So yeah, it is an award. It is award-winning writing. Yeah. It still counts from that time ago. But yes, it's one of those things that you sort of do tinker with in the background for years and not think, I can actually make something of this. And maybe I should have tried to make something of it a bit earlier. But on the other hand, as you get older, you get better, you get more experience. I wouldn't have been able to write something like this like 10 years ago or something, let alone earlier than that. So the reviews started as a sort of online thing for the Billiton website. It was 5 years ago now. And it turned out to be the ideal thing to do during lockdown, to just sit and watch TV for a year, because everybody else was doing that, So, it actually turned into something productive from that. And I don't know, I didn't have an intention when I started the reviews, except just to see what's there and see what thoughts emerge. And then it sort of built up into this more elaborate series of reviews, and it just kind of snowballed from there, really.
What do you guys enjoy about the Reaching a Verdict books?
I think it's
that's good. That's good. You both.
Good, just sat there like.
Well, I just love just how analytical they are. To go into not just details about the characters and the fictional and non-fictional storyline that's going on, but also the sort of the kind of cultural aspect and the real world aspect that was going on at that time, and how much real news stories and real life sort of influenced the plots and storylines at that time. And it's a sort of critical analysis I would love to see for a lot of other TV shows. And I was a big fan of what you did for the Billiton. So when I heard that they were coming out as books, I thought, fantastic. I can have physical copies now.
I mean, for me, it's great to have another viewpoint on the show. The witness statements books are brilliant, and look, obviously the making of the show, this looks at sort of a different angle. Most of those early ones I haven't re-watched since I got them on the old network DVDs. So going through them and say, actually, I remember that episode. That was really good. And maybe then want to go back and pick, cherry pick one of those episodes that's covered. And I think the great thing is that and probably because you've got so many episodes there to look at, you cherry pick the sort of highlights. So it's not, they're not, your books aren't a slog to read. And for some, they might look and think they're very essay-like. But, and if anyone's watching this now, they think, oh, I'm not really sure. Read them. They are really, really good, and they are easy reads. And you can just pick it up, read a page, put it down, come back to it later. You don't have to sit there and read a whole chapter in one go. You can just pick it up and read as you want. And you get a lovely viewpoint on the show from a writer, but a fellow fan. So, yeah, if you haven't read them, if you're watching at home, go out, buy them. There's a couple of copies by Oliver. He probably wants to get rid of them.
That's true, actually. That's true. But I mean, the thing is about TV, I think it's one of those things that could not have been done when the bill was on, because all the books about the bill from that time, they're perfectly good, but they're promotional. They're kind of designed to promote. So a lot of them are so fixated on biographies. They kind of read like dating profiles sometimes, like 40-year-old Trudy enjoys windsurfing, and was recognised last year, stuff like that.
And they're very repetitive as well. You get the same profile. You can tell they've gone back and looked at the old 10-year book and gone, oh, that'll do. I'll have that. And it's always the same characters that get reviewed. Quite often your Toshes and then your Smithies and all that kind of stuff. So the other characters that were big in their era often get missed. So books like Witness Statements and Reaching a Verdict are great for highlighting, as is the podcast, highlighting all those characters or actors that have been forgotten, or in some cases people remember the face, remember the name, but they're not the ones that are always on This Morning or Good Morning Britain or
and what I enjoyed about it too is trying to get this tone right. You want it to be, like you say, more academic, a bit more in depth, but at the same time accessible. I don't want it to read like a textbook on TV, which is what serious work about TV often is. It's kind of dry academic. The idea is that I want to do something that make you laugh a bit and then make you think suddenly, well, I hadn't thought of that, and blend those two together and just keep it going. I'd say the biggest influence, like Doctor Who magazine, I think in its heyday, I think was brilliant at that. You would get a really serious, in-depth article, and you would get a sort of daft comic bit after that, and it would treat it with respect, but also with humour as well, And that's kind of the balance, I think, to try and strike.
And what I loved about it is that because we expanded beyond what was written on the Billiton. I mean, I'd say each book is twice as in depth as the original post had been. But as we were working on the first one, suddenly these chapters started emerging, and then we were like, well, should we actually call this like as if it's an episode title? So then Edward starts literally coming out with episode titles, which would be brilliant bill titles in their own right back in the day.
Yeah, one of which you maybe changed because it was thought it would be a bit offensive, which is fair enough. I did like that title, but yes, you're quite right. I'm not going to say it.
You can edit it out if you want.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to be cancelled straight away. Actually, that was your idea to come up with chapters rather than with like massive slogs of text. So that's a good example. I wouldn't have thought of that, to make it more accessible.
Because if you're looking at like just 1 year as a chapter, and then like you get to 1988, and suddenly you need to lie down, So it was a good way of breaking it up, but also just to where I think we're a good team is sometimes go, can we just put a bit of praise in for John Isles there or Nuala Conwell? Let's just go into, and that's where I can just look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. That this is all really great stuff, but let's not forget the person who had to act this and say those lines. And so it's a good balance. And there is a third in the works. So
there is, yes.
What can you tell us? What have you been enjoying about looking at? So this is going to be 1993 and 94.
Yeah. Well, this is like it going from, this is turbocharged from twice a week to 3 times a week, which is kind of interesting. And, it has its good sides and its downsides. So in a way, you kind of see maybe the show kind of losing a bit of momentum here with so many episodes. But you get 2 great characters coming in, which is Cato and Johnson, basically. One on uniform, one CID, and how they basically just get everybody's backs up around them, and that is always a fun thing to see. And you can kind of see a really good storyline for both of them over the course of those years, which I think the show wasn't so good at doing when it went 3 times, keeping the regulars a good story. It was just a little too self-contained. But those 2 characters, I think, kind of make that kind of era interesting, I think. But then you also get some of the greatest episodes, like the departures, like Roach leaving, things like that, Martella being killed off. Those are the episodes that really stand up. So those are the ones that have been most fun to write about.
What do you guys think? 1993, 94. What instantly pops in your minds then that you're looking forward to reading about?
Well, I've been watching a lot of 1993 over the last sort of couple of weeks, and you've got, obviously, you already mentioned Martella and Roach. You got Burnside mysteriously disappearing. Harry Haynes coming in. Cato, I love Cato. Just such a great character. I wish he'd been in it much longer.
But it's just he's a bouncer. He's a bouncer who's somehow become the policeman. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what he should be doing. Yeah.
The 3 times a week, I think, from about 93 through to about 96, I would say remained fairly consistent. Well, in 1994, you had some great action episodes, Instant Response. I would say maybe around 97 was maybe where maybe it had a little wobble there, and I guess what ultimately had to happen happened. There's definitely a lot more gold in that year to find than probably people would most think. Obviously, there's a lot more episodes to go through and choose from, but I think there was definitely some more variety in some of those stories, and particularly what I like from what happened going into 1995 is, of course, Conway's ascension to acting superintendent, and seeing more of the responsibilities that he faced in charge of the station. So yeah, I think it's definitely an era that I would definitely look forward to seeing explored in more detail, I suppose.
It's interesting what you guys mentioned about the show running a little bit, 3 times a week is a bit. And I was watching some of the episodes recently, and you've got episode 100 called Desperate Measures, episode 103 Desperate Remedies. It's like, come on, if they're in either end of the year, but you've got a gap of like 3 or 4 episodes.
Well, they've got to run out of proverbs. It's the law of averages. They reused a few episode titles. I mean, without the space of years, but it's inevitable, I guess.
But with a gap and they're not even linked episodes either. If it was like a Canley Fields type thing, or it'd be fine. But they're not. They're completely different. Oh goodness.
I remember I was watching, I think it was a series Harry Hill had done for the BBC a few years ago, and they were talking about TV dramas, and they were talking about the fact that Casualty, Holby City, and Doctors all at various points had used the episode title "The Ties That Bind" more than
That's another one, yeah.
So it's almost become a drinking game, The Ties That Bind.
I think the good thing about 93 and 94 is you've got so many firm favourite characters. There's a kind of reassurance about it. There's a lot of change in 1993, but there's so many staples that will be still there in the year 2000, particularly in uniform. And once CID find their new lineup, or we're going into a sort of new golden age. So, I mean, I can't wait to read about it. And where this has helped is that Edward has been getting some hands-on insights into the stories of 1993 and 94, which ties in with the Bill podcast, because Edward is going to be recording a series of writer commentaries, which are going to be released on the Patreon channel. He's already done 2, and they're both terrific. Tonight we're going to announce the first. So I'll let Edward do that himself, announce his first Bill podcast.
Yes, well, the first interview, which I did a few weeks ago now, is with Isabel Gray, who is a writer who wrote several episodes, an awful lot of episodes in this period, 93, 94, and I think carried on until 2009, I think was her last episode. So quite a long stretch from the show. But I mean, certainly she was happiest and talked about that in this era, this kind of era of self-contained literal stories. And I think it was a great discussion we had. I mean, over an hour, I think we covered some of the episodes I think that are her best ones. Yeah, that's the starter. So
the great thing for me is that with these guys, they can go away and do it. I'm not present on the recording. Obviously, when I do podcasts with Natalie, I'm in the background, and Natalie and I do the research together. Here, there's nothing I can tell these guys about the knowledge of the Bill. So for me, it was an absolute pleasure to receive this interview with Isabel, and obviously I edit it and package it all together. a pleasure for me to sit and edit all of your interviews between the three of you, because I don't know what's going to happen next. So it's great for me to sort of edit it as a viewer. But how was it for you getting behind the mic for the first time?
Yeah, you got to get used to it. You got used to looking at yourself and hearing yourself. And yeah, I've got over it now, because you have to. You can't go, oh, I don't want to look at yourself. You've got to be aware of what you're doing. So yeah, it was good after a time. I think we had a good chemistry after a while. I think it's awkward the first few. You sort of ease people into it, but you can't just go and say, so that episode you did back in 30 years ago. What are your memories of that? It's got to be a natural kind of way into it. And I think you're very good at that. So I mean, I had to come up with a big list of questions and ask, and sometimes you end up using all of them, and sometimes you just bounce around a bit. But it's just keeping the thing flowing naturally. But I think after a while, you just sort of forgot about that, and it turned into more of a natural conversation, which is ideally what you're aiming for with all these things.
And of course, you made your on-stage debut for Vanguard Comics at Gospel Comic Con. So and at the beginning of it, when I came on to sort of introduce myself, can anybody hear me? Am I using this mic properly? I don't know. Somebody luckily pointed me to the on switch, which wasn't on. That's always the key thing. So once that was on, it went better. But it was good. We had a good balance of people to talk. There was Larry Dan, there was Mark Wingett, Natalie Rolls, Raji James. Yeah, I mean, the challenge is trying to kind of questions that you can ask to everybody, that you're not being too specific. Yeah, but no, it was good. I mean, I got to tell Larry Dan the best thing about the Bill in the 80s was him making love to a Cherry Bakewell. It's cute, it is. Over that, Mark Wingett laughed at it, making love. And I thought, yes, it is, but watch it. It just picks this thing up out of nowhere and just goes, and devours it. And it's like, there is no point to it. It's just there. That's the best thing about it. There's no reason for it to happen. It just happens. So yeah, that was good. I enjoyed it. Yeah. Patrick.
Hello.
I'm so excited that you're doing this. Tell us a bit about your background and the journey you went on a couple of years ago.
Well, my background was that I had studied acting at college and then uni, and then one thing led to another, and eventually I ended up landing a job in Argos, and I ended up working there for almost 10 years. Various things happened over the years, various personal losses in life, and I enjoyed the time that I had with Argos, but I felt that there was more that I wanted to see of the world, and it was actually during lockdown that I sort of came to a decision that as soon as this thing that we were all going through was over, that I was going to get out there and I was going to see as much of the world as I could. And so eventually, after a bit of saving and a bit of planning, I left Argos after nearly a decade to go traveling around the UK. And I ended up visiting every city in not just Scotland, but Wales and England. I visited, I think, at that time, 65 cities, as I said, including the ones that you've never heard of as well. It was something that I'd really wanted to do. And the fact that I'd gone ahead and done it, I think had just brought this sort of new sense of confidence in me, and I sort of knew that there was something else that I wanted to do, and that there were many other things that I felt that I could do. I think as we all do in life, we feel that one thing ultimately leads to another, and I have been grateful to many of the people I met, such as yourself, Oliver, who have allowed me to just flourish and be able to do the things that I want to do.
As with Rob, which we shall come on to, it's been a pleasure for me to work with you both as you try to do what I've done with All Creatures Great and Small in the Bill and celebrate shows that mean something to you. So why don't you tell us what you've been working on over the last year since your amazing journey visiting the UK? You've started an epic research mission and you've made great progress.
Well, I can announce that I am writing a book about the history of Take the High Road. Take the High Road was a twice weekly drama serial or soap opera that was made by Scottish Television, which ran on the ITV network for well over 20 years. It involved a lot of local talent, both in front of and behind the camera. And it's a show that I feel has got a lot of history to it. And with these long running shows, as well, shows like The Bill, that with that history there must be some behind the scenes information out there. And I just found that there wasn't a great deal out there as much as I would have liked. I knew that I wanted to try and find out as much as I could about the series and try and find newspaper articles or material from that time, just anything to try and tell that story. And since then, I've been extremely lucky to have not only met but interviewed a number of people who have worked on the series. And it's still very much ongoing. From the people that I've interviewed so far, I'm still very much scratching the surface. The hope is to potentially do more than one book. At the moment, the first book is going to cover the early first four series of the show, including also a look at another serial that Scottish television made called Garnock Way, which ran from 1976 to 1979. A number of people who would eventually go on to work on Take the High Road worked on that show as well. So production on that series dovetailed into Take the High Road.
The fact that these people have wanted to meet up with Patrick in person and spend time with him, going through their interviews, sharing their personal archive with him, it's a huge testament to you as a researcher, and the fact that these guys want to enjoy your company. And so you've come an awfully long way from, I remember talking to you before you were going to do your first interview, and you know how understandably nervous you were. But the dozens of people you've spoken to since then, I'm proud of you and everything you're achieving, mate. And I was super excited to have you join the Bill podcast presenting team, and you've certainly made an exciting debut. Would you like to announce who you've recorded a podcast with?
Well, I can reveal that my first podcast is an interview with two actors from the Bill, one who's been on the podcast before and one who hasn't. I was extremely lucky to interview both Lucy Speed and Sally Rogers, played DC Stevie Moss and DC Joe Masters.
And it's an absolute triumph of an interview. And Lucy and Sally were actually together in person. So Patrick had a kind of double whammy in one screen as they were enjoying banter with each other, their best friends in real life. But that's a kind of follow on from the fact that when Sally and Chris Simmons heard about Patrick's journey all around the UK and his own story, they insisted on inviting him to see their play The Still Room and meet him afterwards. And so that's how it began. It's a lovely continuation there of Sally wanting to catch up with Patrick as well and introduce him to Lucy. So,
yeah, as I said, it was a great honour to speak to them both and to hear their memories of working on the show, and to also just see just how close they are as friends, but also how much that friendship sort of extends to other members of the cast from that time. I would be very keen to sort of speak to more people from that era of the show and to sort of see how far and warm that friendship reaches.
There's a terrific anecdote about a ferret, which you will all enjoy, even if they didn't. Working with the ferret. Rob, my dear friend, I mean, we've been in touch similarly for many years. I think initially through Ben Payton. I remember Ben Payton telling me about you and saying, do you know a guy called Rob Cook? He's a great guy, and Cookie's Classics, of course. Tell us about your background, Rob, and when the Bill first came into your life, and when being a content creator and a curator of content. That's quite good. A content creator and a curator of content.
I'll nick that.
Yeah.
Well, the Bill for me, probably 1989, 1990. I have very vague memories of staying up occasionally, allowed to watch it at 8 o'clock, and having a love of the end title sequence. We got the little feet walking away and the middle eight, and then because they gradually walk off the top of the screen. And at some point around about that time, my mum basically said, because I wanted to watch every night, and she's like, well, you can, but there's one thing that you've not done in life that you need to do, and that is learn to tie your shoelaces. And I was one of the few kids at year 2 at school that still had Velcro shoes, and I was like, I've got Velcro. Why would I need to learn laces? And I was a very awkward child at times. And there's this one night, and my mum basically said, you can watch the bill every night as long as you tie your shoelaces. And there's me, little Rob, all crying because I didn't want to do it. I still remember this very, very well. Can you show me one last time? So she does. And then she turns around and watches the telly, and I pretend to do my laces. And I say to her, I've done them now. And she immediately cottoned on that I was trying to have one over on her. And again, more tears. And eventually I learnt to do my laces, and I got to finally watch the bill regularly. I don't sadly remember the very first episode that I watched regularly, unlike you, Ollie, that's very lucky in remembering the episode Kato left, I think, wasn't it? So all I remember is two uniform walking down a high street, and that's it. So I don't know which one it was, but that's when I first started watching the bill regularly. Loved Ron Smollett, great character. Among many others, but Smollett was the one from that very early 90s, I remember. And then, of course, I remember when they stopped doing the middle eight, and I'll be watching the episodes desperate to have the full sequence, and then the feet are still on the screen and the credits are shorter.
Your knowledge of the theme tune, Rob, every time I'm like, what version of the theme tune was it on the titles at this point? You're my go-to with that.
The 2000 era, every now and again they'll drop in the 2003 to 2006 version, and they are quite similar, but for me at least, it's just, no, it's wrong, and it really winds me up because it's what I don't get why, and there's even Head Over Heels in 2001 has got a variation of the normal theme tune. It's the theme, but it's not, and it's odd little things like that. Just, I get they were churning out so many episodes, but when you get a 2007 episode and they've got the wrong theme tune on it, it's like, really? It's like, but again, I don't know what went into the production of that at the time.
Well, to be honest, the theme tune's the only thing I think about that late 90s period, which you have to be aware. I sort of think that whatever it was, it didn't quite get it. I only needed to redo it, but somehow it's missing something. I don't know. It's jazzy. It's the Miami Vice theme.
Yeah, Tess can't stand that one, the saxy one. She's like, what were they thinking?
I remember, I think Bill Bailey was on Room 101, and he actually put it on at the time, and I think he'd went through this whole sort of diatribe about sort of the original version of the Bill theme and how it had that sort of jazz sort of time signature, and was it a sort of subtle hint about the legalization of marijuana?
That clip used to be on YouTube, but I don't think it is anymore, sadly. But and then just whenever an episode popped up, usually they had Lennox or Carver as the leads, I used to record them and did pretty much up until the Sun Hill Fire, I think. And then after that, I didn't record as many because for the soap era, they weren't as individual standouts. But always loved the show. The 10th anniversary book, I used to pore over that as a child, looking at those episodes that you wouldn't be able to watch because we only had 4 channels. Didn't even have Channel 5 when that came on. We couldn't get that in the area where we lived. So yeah, and looking through these episodes, I thought I'd never get to watch, or ones I'd watched before, and then you had a tiny little inkling of Smollett's neighborhood watch van being bombed, or Harry Haynes being in the show, or Sally Johnson, all those kind of things. But yeah, and then in terms of, I've always had a fascination with reading those books, behind the scenes stuff, whether it's The Bill, Doctor Who, Star Trek, anything like that. And then in about 2009, there was a website called TV.com. It used to be TV Tome prior to that. And it was a CBS owned, well, ultimately became CBS owned. And it was like an alternative version to IMDb, and the layout was different, which I at the time preferred. And I used to pore for hours over that website, inputting information and data into it, and finding random shows that I never heard of. And quite often I'd be like, there'd be an actor profile that got like, because it wasn't as up to date as IMDb, but there'd be profiles there of actors that I think they've done more than that. So I'd look for a show, start adding information in, and then before you know it, you've ended up down a rabbit hole because that there's something else linked to it, and it's just this big network. And yeah, I spent quite a long time updating all that kind of stuff and just getting into BFI database, which is wonderful for stuff, and ITN Source, which is sadly gone. Yeah, and just populating all this stuff. Got Sod's Law about 6 years ago, TV.com, gone, and all that information, But it was good to look at finding stuff and piecing together all this information. So yeah, that's sort of my kind of very brief journey with Bill and sort of TV history, really.
I mean, I was always like that at uni, rather than actually working on dissertations and things. I'd be going on IMDb, adding like episodes of Emmerdale that my lecturer directed in 1986, hunting down what. Well, okay, so it's twice a week. Okay, Tuesday, Thursday, 86. Right, all right. So that must have been then. And you forget now how IMDb might have. I mean, 5 credits on it, and that was it. And it was down to people like us populating it. Cookies Classics, that's the earliest thing I remember seeing of yours. So it was that like,
Yeah, well, I had at one point we recorded a lot of telly, a lot of Star Trek predominantly, and had a numbering system with it. So anything with a Star Trek related title on a video was 1 to, I think we got up to 130 in the videotapes, and then anything that was Bill related, I numbered 300 onwards, and then in between with 200 onwards was anything that was in between. So ended up with a lot of videotapes. Then as DVD came in, sort of mid 2000s, I bought DVDs, got rid of the tapes, which I still anyway. And then about 10 years ago, I thought, well, hang on, YouTube, there's other channels out there, and uploaded. I had a tape that had come from my uncle that he'd recorded in 1992, I think, and it still had a load of stuff at the end of it. So I uploaded a British Gas advert that featured Patricia Routledge as a Hyacinth type character. And still to this day, it's the most viewed video on Cookies Classics in the hundreds of thousands. Wow. And on the stats I get every week, it's still the top one. But I go through the tapes I had and would cherry pick out either adverts for shows, because quite often, they're often lost, or adverts that feature someone well known, and occasional odd bits of programs that aren't available commercially. And I've just been doing that over the last sort of 10 years. The majority of the stuff is stuff that I've had. I think now I'm down to 4 tapes. So at one point, I would have had probably a couple of hundred. I'm now down to 4, which my wife's quite keen for me to eventually do and get rid. But I have said the VHS and the telly are still staying.
There's another show that is rather close to your heart and dear to your heart that you've been working on. So tell us about Case Studies, Rob.
Yeah, so Case Studies is a book I've been working on for a year or so now, looking at the first 3 series of the ITV drama series Peak Practice. One of those shows that was massive at the time, regularly in the top 10, hitting 14 million viewers, and that in recent years is often lost to the mists of time. There's a following for it, which is and a following that watched it at the time, and people are now finding the show. And it's been great over the past year to unlock the stories and the history of the show and give people a voice that haven't talked about it either at all publicly or haven't for many, many years. And seeing the warmth and the memories from the people I've interviewed has been really, really nice. And for me, Peak Practice was a show I watched in the 90s when it was on. Admittedly, the last couple of series, I was at that age where it sort of drifted off, but it's been great to be able to watch those afresh and that. Again, it's that funny thing where you watched it 30 years ago, haven't watched it again since. In some regards, some of those episodes I haven't read up about until I started working on my book. But you remember them, you remember elements of them, and you sit there and you go, oh, hang on, I remember that. And it's amazing how the brain works. You can, and I get in those days, you'd watch the telly and you'd be completely, that would be the be all.
Yeah, that's true.
These days, it's much more, sometimes you'd be sitting there and suddenly next thing you know, you're on your, oh yeah. So in those days, it was more fixed, but it's amazing the stuff that, you watched when you were 10 or 15 or whatever, you suddenly remember it. And then it just unlocks all those memories. The people I've interviewed so far have all been wonderful, and it's been lovely to give a voice to the show and open that up. And yeah, obviously the ultimate goal for the book will be to give another perspective on the show and hopefully bring something new for for old fans, new fans, or people that are probably going, "What's that peak practice? Isn't that joke from The Office?" No, it's an actual, it's an actual show, and a bloody good one as well. Yeah, really, really chuffed to be working on it, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to work on it.
You've been interviewing fantastic people for Peak Practice. You've also started interviewing fantastic people for the Build podcast. Rob, would you mind explaining you've done something rather special for the Build podcast?
Yeah, the person I've interviewed first so far will be for an MIT special. First one is Richard Hope, who was DS Barry Purvis in MIT. And for fans who haven't seen MIT but have watched The Bill, he's best known on The Bill for being Rod Jessup, the man that swept June Ackland off her feet. He also appeared in 3 episodes prior to MIT, which we do discuss, one of those in particular. But it's a great insight into MIT, which I feel sadly is often, again, a bit like peak practice. There's a bit of a running theme here. It's been lost a bit in the midst of time. And it's a cracking show. A show of 2 identities, with the first series being very quiet with a lack of music, but very short, sharp scenes. It's to the point, only hour long. And then you've got the second series where it's an hour and a half with adverts, and the scenes are longer and it's slower, and there's incidental music. But it's been wonderful to be able to talk to Richard, not only about the 2 different series, but also his lengthy career. He's been acting since the 70s for 50 years, and he's so much he was able to give about his career. It was a real joy to talk to him, and for him to give up his time to talk to me.
I don't know if you have all felt this, but I think there's always something really special for these experienced veteran actors, creatives, right? When they have people of our age know and appreciate their work from years gone by, and when you can give them that special feedback that their work is still appreciated, I think that's the great gift of podcasting, when you can actually let someone know that what they did means something.
Well, especially when most podcasts out there are just people and their mates shooting the breeze for an hour and chatting, they're actually getting around to a subject. Whereas the great thing about this is your podcast is it actually is talking to the people. It's not just people kind of having a natter, and expecting other people to be entertained. It gets to the real heart of it.
I'm looking forward to seeing how this one goes down, because I mean we've sort of talked about doing something like this for quite a while, and then this opportunity, well, thanks to you all for making this opportunity possible. And I just want to reiterate or explain to people watching this, because obviously this content is going to go on the Patreon channel first. So naturally, I am reimbursing these guys for their time. So they're each getting an equal share of a percentage of the Patreon channel income. So the more people who support the Bill Podcast Patreon channel, the more I'm able to pay Edward, Patrick and Rob for their time in creating content for us all to enjoy, myself included, because that's, as I say, a huge gift for me, is that I get to watch and enjoy these interviews while I'm putting them together for the channel. So I think there's something really special about the fact that you guys came to this podcast as fans of a show and are now interviewing people for it. And I'm just so grateful to each of you for doing it. So thank you.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. It's, when you suggested it to me, I was like, yeah, but taken back, but really, really chuffed. I do feel a little bit sometimes like it's an episode of Wogan, but presented by Sue Lawley. But hopefully the people watching won't think that, but there we go.
I'm sure I can speak on behalf of Rob and Edward as well by saying this, but I think it's fair to say you've been an influence on us and how we do our work as well, and so to learn at the hands of someone who has not only experience of writing books and interviewing and working in television, I think it's been a great education for me, certainly, to get an insight into all this, and I'm just truly grateful for the experience that you've offered, not just to me but for all of us.
You're all teaching me as well, genuinely. I mean, Edward's a far better writer than I would ever be. I wouldn't ever get close to you. You're such a clever, talented writer, and the interviews that you've all delivered already, I'm in awe. And you're teaching me stuff, and you've made me better over time, because you've all been here since the start, since I started the podcast. You know, yeah, I'm grateful, and I'm excited. And in case anyone watching this is wondering, what about Natalie? Don't worry, Natalie is still going to be guest presenting the Bill podcast. The amazing thing that has finally happened is that Natalie is starting getting offered acting work again. Natalie has also recorded her first behind the scenes podcast for the Bill podcast. So coming up later this year is a 2-part interview with an amazingly talented lady called Emma DePaulnay. And Emma was the art director on the Bill for 3 years during the Marquis era and going into the Jonathan Young era. They recorded in person, and there's stuff I'd never even thought about that would have had to have been considered on a show like the Bill. And the pair of them enjoying this reunion for the first time in 20 years. That's a real special listen. So that's coming up on the Patreon channel as well, and will eventually be released on SoundCloud as well. So yeah, and I'll still be recording some commentaries as well. I've got some banked way into 2025 already. My main duties for the Bill podcast, as well as editing the interviews that these legends are going to be recording, is the Evidence Room, which is, if any of you watching this don't know what the Evidence Room is, it is a weekly series where I have been. There's one here actually. Let me just pick it up. So this is what I'm currently recording as I record this. So this is the folder of September 1999, and so each week I dive into a different subfolder, and they're all full of gold. There's scripts in here, there's shooting schedules, there's shooting reports, there's premises and storylines for unmade episodes of the Bill. There's press reports, there's Q&As, there's internal memos, there's handwritten notes from production scheduler Nigel Wilson taken in the weekly script conference meeting, where they talk about not only what storylines are being developed, but which characters are being developed. As I record this, I've recently found the very, very first piece of paperwork about DC Mickey Webb. And Mickey was not his first name at first. And the name he was initially given, you will not believe. And when I sent it to Chris Simmons, he burst into hysterics and said, "Thank fuck they didn't call me that." I'm loving doing this. And for anyone who doesn't know, I've got 60 box files of the Bill production paperwork, which were kindly donated to me by Nigel Wilson, the production scheduler on the Bill, for 18 years. It covers from the middle of 1997 to the spring of 2002, but I've also got some paperwork from 95 and 96. But this is a clear run from the end of Michael Chapman's era through to the beginning of the Paul Marquis era. And so what I've been doing on Patreon this year is what was happening exactly 25 years ago each week in the Bill production team. You guys have seen dozens of episodes so far. What have you enjoyed about the Evidence Room that you've seen so far?
Well, I mean, the stuff that doesn't make it, that's the most interesting thing, especially because you're kind of seeing where they're going and where they're trying to steer away from. And it's, some of the stuff that didn't make it through, you kind of think, you can kind of see that further down the line where that's going to come in, like that one you had about Cryer, that guy taking revenge on Cryer and messing with his head, it's just, you kind of think, I can see what they're trying to do here. They kind of just soup it up a bit, but, it's not really, it's deviating too far from what the Bill is, but that's interesting because then it shows you where what actually went out, how the quality of control was still pretty high, I think, at this time. So they could tell when something wasn't quite right.
And for me, very similar to that, but also I love where you pull out like the records of like the shooting, and this camera's broken, this other bit of equipment's gone down, and you're like, and you just can imagine everyone just doing their thing, or someone going, "Oh, what's going on?" and all that kind of, all the stuff you wouldn't probably think about in the making of the show, or maybe doesn't come up in in previous interviews and podcasts, and all that little minutiae of stuff is a nice another angle at looking in at the show.
It is very much, in my opinion, an oral history of the show, because as well as all the production paperwork that you have, you've also got the a large amount of press coverage as well. And I think speaking earlier about take the high road, for me, like what's important about in covering press coverage is that it gives you that sort of context of where the show was at that time, how it was seen by the public, and what was reported, and so that's the sort of stuff I love as well as the production stuff. It's the sort of reaction, the then contemporary reaction to certain episodes at that time.
I think you've all seen this one, the away day
Yes.
special, which was mind blowing. The way that some of the key decisions were made at that time, and the reasons they were made, I would never have believed in a million years. Focus groups in person with Richard Hanford and viewers across the country saying what they thought about the bill, saying what they thought about characters, which ultimately cost some actors their jobs and ultimately saw storylines make it to the screen. That I find mind-blowing.
Well, I remember that we talked about Tom Sherrington. He posted a link on the podcast to this thesis that Marianne Colburn wrote about the bill. And there's an anonymous quote from an executive producer about focus groups. And you know it's Michael Chapman, but they can't. And his very succinct opinion of what focus groups are about, which is not something that would have future producers would unfortunately have to follow that stuff, but he deliberately did not. You can kind of see why.
Yeah.
And it wasn't only the bill that got that as well, because as I found out with the MIT interview, that also happened on the spin-off.
What was it about, that spice it up a bit? Stolen goods stories are boring, which I think sums up the problem, because without goods stories, what you get is people being bad to each other because they're bad, rather than for gain, and that's where you can see the problems emerge.
Yeah, I mean, that Cryer episode, which was basically like a storyline to Cobra, it would have actually worked in the Marquis era. For right or wrong, it would have slotted in their retreat. And the interesting thing is that these writers who eventually give up because they don't get... I mean, there's one coming up, a BAFTA-winning writer gets turned down. And I've got his synopsis in full, which is in an upcoming episode. And I've recently watched I know this writer's work, and I just watched an Inspector Morse that this gentleman wrote with Tess last weekend. I said, "Can you believe the bill turned this writer down?" She was like, "What?" I was like, "I know." So it's really fascinating, and I mean, I can't wait to keep going into these folders, and obviously, the nearer it gets into, to All Fall Down and beyond, that's going to be fascinating to learn the who, the what, the where, the why, and when things happened, and fascinating. So that's my immediate Bill podcast. But I've recorded my first shooting schedule commentary where I bring to life the making of an episode with the original shooting schedule. I loved doing that, and there's going to be a few more of them, I think. But that's a great thing, is that everyone can let me know what they like in the folders, and hopefully I can tailor make it.
The only problem I have with it is I have to be careful, because if you start reading too much about the stories, I want to go to them fresh in a couple of years. Those episodes. I'm very careful about how much I watch of them. Yeah.
Well, actually, that's taught me a lesson. I've realised where my gaps are in viewing of the Bill and Matt era. So I'm now actually recording reactions to episodes transmitted in upcoming months, so that when I'm reading the reviews in the press, and these reviews are really detailed and quite spoilerific in places, where I think, I really wish I hadn't read that, even though I'm 25 years too late. It's not the report's fault, admittedly, but it's highlighted some stories I've missed that I haven't been treated to yet, and I've had some treats coming up. Listen, this has been an absolute joy. Ladies and gents, this is the future of the Bill podcast right here, and I think the podcast is in very safe hands. And we're grateful to every single one of you who continues to tune in and watch the Bill podcast. If you've ever considered signing up to Patreon and checking it out, you can start from £2.49. There's also some free reactions on there, part one of some of my journey through 2007 Bill. You can sign up for free, you can watch them, and if it tickles your fancy, you can then unlock a host of content for £2.49 and upwards. There's a treasure trove on there, if I do say so myself now, just because of the fact the channel's been going for 5 years, so there's an awful lot to unpack, including some gold dust coming up with these three men. So, Edward, Patrick, Rob, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is Natalie Rolls, and you have been listening to the Bill Podcast. Brought to you in association with GeorgeFairbrother.com, shop.saturdaymorningpress.co.uk, vanguardcomics.co.uk, and gibconsultancy.co.uk. The Bill Podcast is produced by Oliver Crocker, co-produced by Ben Adams, Glenn Allen, Rob Cook, Glenn Cooney, Georgina Dark, Sarah Kuiper, Bryony Kelly, Maz Mirabilis, Alex Mockler, and Simon Wolfe. Our executive producers are Isabel Allen, Ben Ashmore, Mark Bennett, Alana Dewar, Andrew Dyack, Dan Evans, George Fairbrother, Stuart Gibbon, Luke Hegarty, Robert Hoger, Edward Kellett, James Ledane, Thomas Johnston, Gary Moncur, Danny Morris, Steph Morris, Claire Norbury, Laura Pinney-Fay, Alistair Wrigley, Michael Seeley, Nicholas Shaw, Natalie Smart, Angel Stannard, Paul Statter, Patrick Stratford, Michael Weil, and Sarah Went. Huge thanks to all you lovely producers who make the Bill Podcast possible. Bye for now.